There is a Millennial Temple that's detailed for us in the last 9 chapters of the book of Ezekiel. And there's a description of this temple. It is so detailed that you can't treat it as just an allegory. People try, it doesn't work. It's not simply symbolic, it's a literal place. Now, all nations, not just Israel, all nations come to worship there, interestingly enough. Offerings and sacrifices are resumed. That may surprise you. There's good reasons for that. We'll take care of that in the Q&A if you like. Interestingly enough, that temple, when it's built, is only open on Shabbat and the new moons. And that's one of the things the Seventh-day Adventists may have correct. Now, there's a lot of things they have we don't necessarily agree with, but that's one they may be right on solid ground, because Ezekiel makes that quite clear. It's not open on Sunday. Really. Now, most of us study the tabernacle, and I won't go through a whole build-up there, but just to refresh your memory a little bit, how the original tabernacle in the Old Testament had a linen fence, and had 7 pieces of furniture, a group of which were in the temple proper, the naos. And it's that pattern of the temple proper that we tend to focus on when we study the tabernacle. And each one of these things has a role. There's 7 pieces of furniture, if you count the 2 that are outside. And the Word was made flesh in the tabernacle, so we know that Jesus made a claim to be on each one, be represented by each one of those, and that's one of the most fruitful studies you can undertake on your own. I leave you to do that. And the second temple takes that model into Solomon's program. It takes the same basic architecture, but it adds some things. And the reason that Nan will touch on some of that, I believe, in her prop thing. And then there's these storerooms, which have profound implications. There's a porch, and there are 2, Jachin and Boaz, 2 pillars that have peculiar names. They don't hold up anything. They're used there idiomatically, interestingly enough, to be apparently to embody the volition. And the personal storage, where the priests hid their false idols, are there. And those all have implications for all of us that I'll let my wife develop. But let's turn this on its side, because it's easier to elaborate on how Ezekiel adds things to this. He adds steps and chambers for the singers, and he adds priest chambers and priest kitchens. And as we back, then he has the inner gates, and then he has the outer gates, and then he has the chambers of the outer court, if you will. So there's an inner court and an outer court and so forth. They have the people's kitchens in the far corners. And then we have a strange, the outer gates. And that leads to a phrase that's widely misunderstood. The darkness, speaking of the darkness outside, there's a whole controversy about that we can get into Q&A if you like. It occurs 23 times in the Septuagint, strangely enough. But let's step back from all of this and talk about the Holy District. It turns out that if you take a space that's 25,000 cubits on a side, and you put the temple, not exactly in the middle of it, but certainly in the midst of it, and you have Levites to the north, you have living quarters for the sons of Zadok, you have Jerusalem substantially to the south. The temple is not in Jerusalem. Think about that. It's not in its traditional location. And there's food growing places, and there's portions for the prince, whoever he is, and that's a whole other mystery that's involved. And but it's so detailed that you can't allegorize this. And there's even water that comes out from the temple and flows to the east and west. But then the land is allocated to the 12 tribes in a very interesting order. And so that's all in Ezekiel 48.